Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. Series 3 of the Family Health podcast is sponsored by Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Savlon Scar Prevention Gel speeds up healing, helps soothe pain, and reduces the likelihood of scarring when used on minor wounds, superficial burns, and grazes. And to be frank, with my 6 children in my house, cuts, scrapes, and grazes are plentiful. So my first aid kit, saviour, is Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Hello, my name's Kate from Mini First Aid. I am your host today for the Family Health podcast by Mini First Aid. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast. So if you're in the car, perhaps you're cleaning, or perhaps you're relaxing with a cuppa, our Family Health podcast covers a huge range of topics that might affect one of your family members. And if you've ever got a family health concern or a safety concern or a worry and you're thinking, I will just Google that, please don't. Please listen to us instead, because we will bring you the answers that you need. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our guest this week, Luisa Rollins-Svensson. Thanks for joining us today. Luisa is a car seat expert, safety expert from Graco, and a fellow mum, so she knows her stuff. And it can be pretty bamboozling knowing what's right, what car seats are right for the what age. Luisa, I've got so many questions for you. Literally, I am armed, ready. I've got so many things that I want to ask you. And I'm absolutely thrilled that Luisa agreed to guide us through this minefield of car seats for our little ones. So welcome to the Family Health Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Really happy to be here. And yeah, I've been in the nursery industry with Graco for 15 years.
Wow.
So it feels like a lifetime now. But yeah, mum of two boys, 6 and 15. So been through the car seats journey. Still with one of them, obviously, in a car seat. So I understand the questions, worries that new parents, experienced parents might still have. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
And I think it for parent, and I'm sure, I mean, my eldest is 13 now, that you will have seen some real changes in innovation, technology, safety. And I can still go back, right, to remembering where we used to go on holiday and we'd have extra cousins and you just squash as many kids as you possibly could on the back seat of the car, or you'd put a seatbelt round everyone and just and just hope for the best. And as a baby, that my mum would put my carry cot just on the back seat, loose on the back seat. So, and that really is a change in 40 years. So it's fascinating to see that.
So fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Is it just me, or is choosing a car seat an absolute minefield?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially as a new parent, you have these exciting news you're expecting, and then the journey of starting to get the essentials, car seat being one of them. And there's so many brands out there, and everyone's talking about the same things but in a slightly different way, so it really simply becomes quite confusing, and knowing what you need versus what you want, absolute minefield.
And I mean, we've so as Mini First Aid, we are regularly at lots of baby shows, baby toddler show, that sort of thing, where you'll see a wealth of car seat choices. And to navigate that, and you can see why parents just go, I'm just going to go home and Google it, because I don't really know. And that sort of leads me on to my next question, really, because there have been a number of changes in legislation which can be confusing, and the regulations have changed, if I'm right, you're going to tell me now, I hope, that have changed recently around rear-facing seats for babies. So tell me a little bit more about the law and what it now says you need for babies and children.
So there are 2 main standards. R44, which has been the main standard for a number of years, and then it's followed on to and in process of being replaced by R129. And there will actually be a cut-off period in the UK where R44 will still be available, but it will no longer be purchased in by brands and retailers.
Okay.
And everything's moving over to R1 to 9.
Right.
But it's still safe to use R44, so that's really important to say. So if you do have an R44 seat, don't run to the shops to get an R1 to 9. But the main differences between the two standards is R129 is one is measured, or the child is measured by its height instead of its weight. A lot of parents will know the size of your child rather than the weight of your child. It also promotes extended rear facing for longer, improved side impact protection. So with R44, there was no legislation or requirement for side impact testing, crash testing. Whereas with R129, that is a requirement. And then also ISOFIX comes into it, and iSize, so the installation of car seats into your car. So those are the main four pointers, what in the difference between the two. But rear facing is a big thing. So with R129, the children have to stay rear facing to a minimum of 15 months.
Right, okay. And it used to be less than that, didn't it? Yeah.
It could be up to just 12 months.
Okay.
But you will find, we do at Graco, we promote extended rear facing up to 4 years as a minimum.
Yeah.
Because we know that is the safest way to travel for your baby.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a little bit more about rear facing, because that I've seen a change in that as I've had 6 kids, so I've had lots of, I've had a long relationship with car seats, and I've seen a change. And pretty much when my son was, who's 13, was a baby, at 12 months, everybody just turned them around and put them in a different seat. And now there's this real messaging about extended rear facing. Why is that? Why keep them rear facing for longer and have that extended period?
Well, as children, they are very obviously small, fragile. They're still developing their muscles, bones, and over 70% of accidents are frontal accidents. And when a child is forward facing, it flings them forward, which can cause serious injuries to head, neck, and spine. Whereas when they're rear facing, the seat actually takes it spreads the force of the impact around the shell.
Right.
And allows, there's a less what's the word? Sorry.
So like the impact going to the child, effectively. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because effectively, the impact is hitting the seat if you've been hit in a front-on collision.
Yeah.
And that's spreading rather than. So one of the questions that I had is that sometimes if you think about extended rear facing, is that when they're a baby, obviously their legs are only little, and so they're sort of predominantly they're inside the car seat, aren't they?
Yeah.
So what happens when they've got these lanky legs and they're starting to poke out, and we're still encouraged to keep them rear facing? Where do their legs go? What do you do with their legs?
I mean, you'd be surprised how agile children still are. As I said, their bones, legs, muscles are still developing, and but we would always encourage regular breaks. So if you think they might be uncomfortable, allow yourself extra travel time if you're going a bit of a longer distance, just to get that break from the car seats. But yeah, you'd be surprised how agile they actually are.
So effectively, they're happy to have their legs squished up a little bit.
Yeah, I think having children now, just sitting around the house, they always sit in funny positions. They never sit.
Yeah, that's really true. That's really true.
As a normal adult does, they sit with legs crossed in a really funny position.
So I'm thinking of it more from my own perspective, thinking, gosh, I wouldn't want my legs against the back seat. But actually, for children, that's not a thing. And if you then give them regular breaks to get out and have a stretch as well. Oh, okay. Yeah. Is there then a sort of a recommendation for when you can switch to forward facing, when it's safer to, or when is a good time?
Yeah, obviously the law says 15 months.
Okay.
However, a lot of the brands, including Graco, we say 4 years try to keep them rear facing till 4 years. But we know with a lot of children, it doesn't always work. They are ready to be forward facing sooner than 4 years. They want to see the world, and you have travel sickness, for example, where it's easy to manage if they're forward facing. So we know and we understand there are times when you want to keep them forward facing, but we always recommend keep them rear facing for as long as possible. It's just the safest way to travel.
And I think for me, I'm a very visual person, and if you visualise that impact hitting a seat rather than a person effectively, then that actually is a better way to just say. I find with my kids that when they were rear facing, is that, I mean, I've had a lot of kids, so they could all talk to each other, even if they were looking at the back seat. And we had things like mirrors and things, so that actually they could still see us. And they could still have a visual with me, or see what was going on in the front, still see out the front window, and they could see out the side, so they could still, they could still see. And there's all sorts of wonderful toys and accessories, as long as they're safety checked, that you can have in the car, right? That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you can. Oh, okay. So that's interesting. But what about, so the next step, I guess, is that, perhaps at some point you've moved them to forward facing. Hopefully, you've kept them rear facing till they're 4. What's the point about at what point does the booster thing happen? Because still, I'm going, how do I find out? And do they have to have a back? What's the thing about booster seats? Help me solve my mystery.
Yeah, I think with high back boosters, I think from a technical perspective, you would move them into a high back booster mode from about 100 centimeters, which is about 3.5 to 4 years. And then they would sit in there, we say, up to about 12 years. And we know it's really hard to keep, especially those plus 8-9 years. They don't want to sit in a car seat anymore. But from 100 up to, so the law is up to 135 centimeters.
Yeah.
Majority of the high back boosters in the market goes up to 150 centimeters. So that will allow that extra, maybe a year or 2.
But 135 centimetres, they have to be...
Yeah, and the high back boost essentially allows your older toddler child to sit in a better position, to allow for the belt to be, because you're using the vehicle belt, to be in the correct position across the body.
Right, okay.
So in event of an impact, it doesn't do harm to the child. It protects...
Because it's got them higher up effectively.
Yeah, it's got higher up.
Yeah.
And you've got belt guides to make sure that the belt sits exactly where it needs to sit.
Across the body. Because I guess if they sit without a booster, you can see it coming down across their face.
Yeah, exactly.
Which could cause a...
And you also have, with the R129 high back boosters, you have better head support as well. So you have that kind of almost wrapping around your head to ensure that there is protection for the head as they grow a lot older.
Right, okay. So there is some quite firm regulation in the sense of when your child needs to be on a seat, and it's that 135, I guess, is your, and again, if you can keep them seated on a booster till they're 150, great, but 135 is your point where it's actually it's a legal requirement. I've got that right, isn't it? It's actually the law.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the law. Okay, so let's talk about buying car seats then, because if somebody's looking at options, all these different choices, what are the things, what would you say parents should have on there? If they got a pencil now and they're writing a list, what should be on their buying criteria for buying a car seat? What do they need to be looking for?
Well, there's so many things. Obviously, budget comes down to it.
Yeah.
And also kind of what your lifestyle is. So, for example, do you want a car seat to fit on your pushchair frame?
Okay.
Do you not need a car seat that you move from house into home? Do you want something that lasts you a bit longer but becomes more of a permanent fixture in your car? So there's so many options to bear in mind, but I would say make sure that the car seat fits the car and model that you have. So a lot of the brands will have fitting guides where we've tested all the car makes with our various seats, and they should be on all websites. If not, get in touch with customer services teams and they will be able to assist you to make sure but the car seats you're looking at actually fits your car. Not all car seats fit in all cars.
Sure, and you just assume that's a given. It's a given. So you need
Yeah,
to check
absolutely.
it's going to fit. Let's find out more about today's episode sponsor. Graco has a great selection of child car seats at highly affordable prices, with care and attention in every detail. Graco knows that family finances are stretched and we cannot compromise when buying items to keep our children safe. Search the Graco Village Safe Journeys for information and support on car seats. Learn about the latest safety standard R129. Choose seats that enable rearward facing for longer and be confident when it's time to update your child's seat. When it comes to car seats, Graco makes a promise to every parent. When you can't hold them, we will. And effectively what you're saying is making a shopping list of what are your requirements, what do you need your car seat to do, as well as be in your car. So I guess for some people, they never take it out of their car. And I've seen these ones now, I'm going to show my age now, that they turn sideways. So you can then get them out of, and there's sideways turning. And there's also ones that will see your baby through and so the seat makes itself into a different shape. Is that a thing? Or I haven't made that up, have I?
Absolutely. I mean, the rotating car seats is the most popular car seats I think people will look for. But then absolutely there are car seats that are from birth all the way up to the 150 centimetres.
In one actual seat?
In one seat.
That's incredible. So you never have to buy another one. So it might be a more significant investment, but you never have to buy another seat.
Yeah, it probably would be. But then, but that more than likely that will become a permanent fixture in your car. So if you're in need of having the infant carrier, that you probably won't need when you leave hospital, in all honesty, because you have to leave hospital with baby in something. You can't carry baby out. So just bear that in mind as well. Kind of what do you need? Yeah,
okay. And there is obviously now a big culture around everything's purchased online. We do stuff online, and and there are obviously retail outlets and stockists where you can go and look at car seats, but some of the big brands that are of other years are not there, where you used to be able to go and try your car seat and what have you. So what are your thoughts about buying car seats online? What do you think, in your personal recommendation? Someone says, I'm going to go online, I'm going to buy a car seat. What would you say to them?
I would say there's so much comprehensive information. I wouldn't don't steer away from shopping online.
Okay.
There's a lot of useful information, but take your time, do your research. If you have an independent nursery shop near you, or a Halfords or a John Lewis or a Smith's Toys, pop in, have a look at the car seats, get a feel of you want, and then there will always be more choice online than what you've seen in stores.
Right, okay.
But I will say with car seats, take your time, do your research, but absolutely, I think from any reputable retailer, it's absolutely fine and safe to buy car seats.
What about second-hand car seats? What are your thoughts on second-hand car seats?
You just never know how they've been used, and if there've been any type of impact whatsoever. They might look fine, but actually there might be structural damage in the shell.
Yeah.
So we'd advise against it.
Yeah. I guess it's just... Yeah. So is there somewhere that second-hand car seats can go for recycling or for, repurposing or something? Because there just seems to be... We were looking at, the number of 600,000 babies born in the UK every year, and people are buying a new car seat. Where can they go if they're not? And I understand that they can't necessarily. They're not recommended to be used secondhand if you don't know its history. Yeah. Is there a way you can recycle a car seat? What happens to them?
It's a very good question. I would just get in touch with the brand that you might be considering, and most car seats will have a label on it with the specific reference for that car seat, and they can look it up and see how old the car seat is, perhaps.
Okay.
And if they're able to, a lot of the manufacturers will have service centres where you can send the car seat into, and if it's still within warranty, that will also have an effect. So there are a number of things to consider. So also always get in touch with the brand, the manufacturer where the car seat's been made, and they can advise further.
Right, that's really helpful. There is just lovely attachments and things that you see online that you can have to go with your car seat. Gadgets and gizmos, I think, is what we sometimes call them in the parenting world. Are there any things that you would say, oh, don't waste your time with that? Or, yes, that's a brilliant thing that we see or we encourage parents to have for their car seats?
Yeah. It's a difficult one. Well, it's a difficult one, but it all really depends on your budget, I think,
Okay.
what your budget allows. And I'll say, if anything, the feature that we get most asked for is the rotating feature.
Yeah.
And it is very much a great benefit, especially if you've had a C-section and not having to do the bending over a lot, and been able to rotate the child to be facing with you from the door. And when they get to the toddler stage and it gets a little bit more difficult doing the harness up, as you know, when they don't want to get into the car seat. So if there's anything you want to consider, I would say the rotating feature more than anything else.
And it wasn't a thing when my eldest son was a baby.
No,
and I now watch with envy when you see parents parking up and being able to just... Because otherwise you're sort of leaning across their face to do them up.
Exactly, yeah.
Normally under the pressure because somebody's trying to reverse in the car next to you and what have you. So that's really helpful. I think it's really helpful. And just to hear about the fact that, one is that, if you want to understand about the lifetime or lifeline of your car seat, that you can speak to manufacturer and have manufacturer support. And just going back to where we started and thinking about the fact that there are regulations that you needed that you need to understand, and that there are rules around around car seats and when your children can be in them. Talk to me then about the front of the car, right? So I'm the driver. Yeah. When can one of my children sit next to me in the front seat of the car? Is there a rule or advice? What's the...
So babies aged 0 to 3, they can only be in the front seat if there is no space. So if you're driving a car where there isn't sufficient space in the rear seat to put the car seat into, they can come in the front seat, but only if you can turn the airbag off.
So let me just explain that back. So you've got to say there's no sufficient space in the back, so the back seat's already full of people or whatever. You don't have a back seat.
No. So even that.
Oh.
So if there is a seat that is big enough to take a car seat in the rear,
they need to be in it.
It has to go on the rear seat.
Right.
If the seat, it might be too narrow for some cars, the really sporty ones where you hardly got any back seat.
Yeah.
And you have to put them in the front seat. You can only do that if you can turn
off the airbag. Yeah.
By law, you cannot have the airbag turned on using a rear-facing seat in the front.
And you need to find out effectively how to turn your airbag off, because that's normally a key or a device, isn't it? And that I've seen instructions for that in the visor and sometimes in the glove compartment or down the side panel of the door.
Yeah, normally in the glove box there'll be it almost looks like a little key that you've got to turn to turn it off. And then from 3 upwards, again, we always recommend for them to be kept in the rear seat. Yeah. But if they do, for any reason, need to go in the front, pull the seat back as far as you can away from the airbag.
Okay.
Because children cannot withstand the force of an airbag like an adult can, and it can cause them serious injuries, which is why either you have to turn it off, and if you can't turn it off, pull the seat as far back as possible, but preferably keep them in the rear seat.
Right, I didn't know that. That's right. So pull the seat back. So effectively
pull the seat as far, because it just allows either so the airbag doesn't reach them essentially.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And is there an age where it becomes more it's more acceptable, or it's okay for them to be sat in the front, or is it just a case of you need to keep children?
I think once they get to the point of where they don't need a high back booster anymore,
Right.
that's when
That's your
they can
point.
go in the front seat.
That's your point. Okay.
Because essentially there are at a height, I guess, where they're almost becoming like an adult size.
Yeah,
where
sure.
they can
Yeah. My son is a teenager, but he's taller than me. So yeah. Okay. Because that's the other thing that a lot of parents have, is this nag from children wanting to be in the front. You want to ride up front. It's seen as a perk or an excitement. And I guess once you've said yes, it's very difficult.
It's hard. It's difficult.
It's difficult.
It is difficult, but yeah, the safest place is in the back.
Yeah, you've got to make the back really cool. It's got to be where it's at. And I always say to my children, I'd like to sit in the back. Oh, I'd love to not drive. And they just look at me. Yeah, I'd love to be driven. Because ironically, as an adult, if you are driven, that's seen as a luxury, isn't it? People have drivers, all that sort of stuff. I'd get in the back in a heartbeat. Not have to drive for hours when we go on holiday. But but kids, they just have this, I want to be in the front. And so that's really interesting. Thank you. We hadn't warned you that we were going to ask this question, but I just wondered, just going back to babies, because sometimes there's a little bit about mixed messaging about car seat harnesses and doing them up, and babies' outer garments and what they wear.
Yes.
Is there any advice that you would give around how to dress your children when they're in car seats?
Yeah, I mean, for all children from baby up, whilst they're in any type of car seats, avoid any thick outer clothing. So no thick coats. The harness just won't do what it's supposed to do if you've got that thick layer. So you almost need to have that harness sit against the body. So I said, from a small baby, put double layers on them perhaps, and then put a blanket on top of them. And
so harness up first and then blanket over the top.
Yeah.
And that means that the harness is close to baby's skin. And presumably you could do that with older children as well, where you could offer them a blanket or something if they're...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that the challenge quite often is, particularly if you're in the UK listening, is that, we have such freezing cold winters, and you pile in the car in your great big snowsuits and big padded jackets, and actually you do need to take them off, really, for safety.
It's such an easy thing that people just don't think of. You're in a rush for the school run in the morning, chuck everyone in the car and off you go. And we know a lot of accidents happen within like a 20-mile radius of your home, because you are in familiar surroundings. And you kind of just go and, you just don't think where you're going, but you know where you're going. And
you do drive like a
robot. Autopilot, and that's where accidents happen, unfortunately. And we would just put the coat on when you get to your destination, and the children will be absolutely fine. Yeah,
they will. A bit chilly when they first get in the car, but that's safer from an accident.
Yes.
An accident. Luisa, this has been really insightful, thank you. And I think even me, having had loads of kids, you think you know it all and you don't, and it's challenged some of my thinking, just particularly on the coat wearing, because that's you think of that more for babies, and when that's a message that we share, but for older children, if they're still in car seats as well, I think that's really interesting. If I was to ask you, and we always do this on our podcast, if I was to ask you for one takeaway piece of advice that you from Graco would want people listening today to think about or to take away on car seats, what would you want to tell them?
That's a good question. I just want to make sure, get a car seat that you feel is right for you, your family, for what you need, but take your time. There's so many options, but I think the one thing is make sure it's tested to a good standard. You can see for example, the R129 icons. All the car seats will be labelled up, and I think that's the best thing I can say, really. It's and make sure it fits your car.
Yeah.
We get a lot of people that will buy a car seat and then send us a message saying it doesn't really fit in my car. What do I do? So, yeah, make sure it fits your make and model.
Louise, that's really helpful. Thank you. What we're going to do in the podcast notes, which will be available on your podcast platform, is we'll ask Louisa for her signposting so that you can find this information and those safety symbols, because you mentioned those symbols to look for, and I think it would be quite good if we could have a signpost as to where we can find that information and get those visuals. But thank you for joining us today on the Family Health podcast. It's been really insightful. And for those of you at whatever stage you're at, whether you're buying a car seat, you're pregnant, and you're just buying your first car seat, or perhaps you're a bit further along and you're thinking about at what point you need to move children from rear facing and all those. So I hope that Louisa's information has been really helpful today. So thank you. You've been listening to the Family Health podcast. Thank you for joining us. You can subscribe on your podcast channels. That means that your latest episode of the podcast will drop straight onto your listening device when it's available. And it's also worth making sure that you follow Mini First Aid, where you will get regular family health advice and also notifications on our podcast, and get the opportunity to sign up to a newsletter where you can have regular family health advice drop into your inbox every week. And I have one more appeal for you. If there are particular subjects that you would like Mini First Aid to cover, you'd like us to talk to the experts, then please do get in touch. We drive the content of this podcast based on what families want to hear. You've been listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms at Mini First Aid. I take Savlon Scar Prevention Gel everywhere with me so that I am always prepared for the many little and sometimes bigger accidents that my kids encounter. Thank you again to Savlon Scar Prevention Gel for sponsoring Series 3 of the Family Health Podcast.